Welcome to Tailoring Talk with me, your host, Roberto Rivilla. The 25th entry to the James Bond series, No Time to Die, is upon us. Released last night here in the UK. It also marks Daniel Craig's last time in the dinner jacket. And, as by pure coincidence rather than design, Casino Royale happens to be the 21st Bond movie, so it's only fitting that episode 21 of Tailoring Talk be dedicated to one of the best 007 films ever made. It's time to revisit Casino Royale. Thank you so much to Julius H. from Pixabay for the Secret Agent themed music. Enough of a Bond twist without giving MI6 good reason to come after me. Casino Royale stars Daniel Craig in his first outing as James Bond, directed by Martin Campbell, who also directed Pierce Brosnan's first 007 movie, GoldenEye, 11 years prior in 1995. The movie also co-stars Mads Mikkelsen as Le Chiffre, Dame Judi Dench as M, Eva Green as Vesper Lind, Giancarlo Giannini as Rene Mathis, and Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter. The screenplay was written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade and Paul Haggis based on the 1953 novel of the same name, and was produced by Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. Brief synopsis: after earning 00 status and a license to kill, Secret Agent James Bond sets out on his first mission as 007. Bond must defeat a private banker funding terrorists in a high-stakes game of poker at Casino Royale in Montenegro. The movie holds a 94% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that pretty much tallies with my sentiments towards this film. It's probably my favourite Bond film ever. I think Daniel Craig has done such an amazing job in the role. I remember the run-up to the release of this film, and I wasn't expecting much because I thought Pierce Brosnan had done a great job up until the last one he did, which was, let me think for a second, the one, Die Another Day, that's it. I think of that awful Madonna song. And that had just gone over the top with the action sequences and the CGI and the stupid invisible car and all that sort of stuff. It had just become too incredulous. And all right, James Bond isn't completely rooted in reality, but the thing I did love about Casino Royale is the fact that they took it back to basics and did for the Bond franchise what Christopher Nolan did for the Batman franchise, where with Batman Begins he sort of took it to a really gritty place and tried to root it in the real world reality as much as possible. And I just thought they did such an amazing job with this movie. It's for me, it's pretty much the perfect Bond film. I was hugely inspired by it after I saw it. I remember seeing it. It was probably opening night in Leicester Square, at the Odeon in Leicester Square. And I remember going with my then girlfriend, now wife, and my boss and his then girlfriend or wife, and maybe a couple of other colleagues from work at the tailoring firm that I was at. And I remember dressing up. I didn't have a tux at the time because it was before I got married. My first tux I made in 2008 for my wedding. So I remember that night I was wearing probably a very light grey three-piece suit, very similar to one that Daniel Craig wore a few years later in Skyfall, and dress shoes and a bow tie and, a scarf and a hat, and everyone just got dressed up. It was just so much fun. We were just so excited for it. As I just mentioned, a couple of years later, I made my first tux for myself for my wedding, and that was basically a copy of the tux that Daniel Craig wears in this film, which is a single-breasted with a double-breasted or peak lapel dinner jacket in black with black satin lapels and trim. The shirt is a sort of take on a Royal Oxford with a bit more of a golf ball surface sort of effect, in white with a covered front, or a fly front we call it, where you can't see the buttons or the studs. And I basically, that's, you see Daniel Craig in the movie sitting at a poker table. That's pretty much what I looked at like at my wedding, except a bit more tan maybe. And I also, Omega, as they always do, introduced a limited run of 10,007, so 10007 Omega Seamasters for Casino Royale to commemorate the film, and that watch is super special. It's got instead of the Seamaster waves on the face, it's got the the famous James Bond gun barrel, and then there's a little 007 logo on the sweep hand, and it's a fantastic watch. I saved up for it. I worked really, really hard for it. It commemorates a massive achievement in my career and working life at the time, and it just holds so many sentimental memories. So I was all in on Casino Royale, trust me. So to kind of, I guess what I want to do is sort of run through the film, because we did rewatch it a few days ago, and I made a lot of notes. I just want to talk about the outfits in it primarily. If Blofeld was here and had a laser up my gonads, he'd probably say, in response to my, do you expect me to talk? Yes, I expect you to tailoring talk. Sorry, that was terrible. So we open like pretty much no other Bond film, really. The MGM logo comes up. It's all in grainy black and white. And then the Columbia Sony Pictures banner comes up, and that's also in black and white. And we're transported to Prague. Daniel Craig at this stage of the movie is not a 00 yet. There's he's basically in the office of a section chief who we very quickly learn is corrupt. And then they intercut the scene between him and the section chief with a bathroom scene, which is like no other action scene that we've ever seen in a Bond film. It's violent in a visceral way. Bond is really going to town on this guy, and it turns out I think he's some sort of he works for this section chief basically. Smashing his head into sinks and all the rest of it. It's just so wham bam violent. And in that scene, he's wearing a linen suit. And I know this because I've seen a lot of behind the scenes, and you can actually tell in the scene, if you look carefully at the creasing of the jacket, the way it creases across the back of his shoulder blades and so on, and the way it creases in the opposite side of the elbows, whatever that's called. It is definitely a linen suit that Bond's wearing in that scene. You really feel everything that's going on in there, and that really sets the tone for how this film was written and directed and shot and so on. Obviously, he kills the section chief because he's a corrupt bastard, and that's how he gets his 00 status, because you need 2 kills. And it turns out that the guy that he's completely duffing up in the bathroom was the first kill. And then obviously the section chief is the second. Then the titles come up, and that fabulous song by Chris Cornell, rest in peace, Chris. He passed away probably a couple of years ago now. I think it was a drug overdose, but Chris Cornell was the lead singer of Audio Slave, and he's got such an amazing voice. So You Know My Name is the title song for the film, or the beginning credit song for the film. And that's performed by Chris Cornell and I believe David Arnold, who took over Bond's scoring duties from John Williams during the Pierce Brosnan era. Also co-wrote that song as well. And again, I think that the title credits for this Bond film are among the best in the series history. The graphic and visual artists were inspired by the cover of the original Casino Royale novel, which basically featured I think it was a playing card with the Queen of Hearts, and the hearts are sort of dripping with blood. And so they took inspiration from that, and that's why you see all these sort of playing card themes, like when, you know, Bond is shooting, or when the bad guys are shooting, the bullets shoot out of the guns, and their clubs, playing card clubs. It's just a fantastic sequence. It's a visual feast, and it really locks you in for the movie. And the song is great as well. I just love it. I made a note of the wardrobe supervisor, who was Dan Grace, and Lindy Hemming, who's worked on so many films over the years. And I mentioned Martin Campbell, the director, before. Again, they all did such a fantastic job. So after the credits, we then go to Uganda, and Mads Mikkelsen appears. He's another one of my favourite actors. If you see the work that he's done, particularly in Hannibal, and the outfits he wears in that as well, but such a great bit of casting. So he's this character called Le Chiffre, who's a private banker to all these sort of gun runners and warlords and so on. And then we see this ominous Mr. White, who we'll talk about later, sort of in the background. And he's with these warlords, and he takes their cash, and he straight away is on the phone to his stockbroker or whatever in London, and he's making a bet against Skyfleet stock. His private banker basically advises him against it. So apparently there's going to be the launch of this new airliner, and betting against the stock is the wrong thing to do, because any of you that are far cleverer than me will know why. But, to be honest, it was only on this rewatch when I was making notes that I actually understood the plot of the film. Anyway, and I've seen this film so many times. Then we quickly cut to Madagascar. And again, such an amazing opening action sequence. Basically, Bond and his MI6 partner are sort of tailing somebody, and then his partner basically screws it up, and this leads to a chase. And the guy that Daniel Craig is chasing is actually a free runner. He's a free runner in real life. And it's just fantastic. The chase itself really shows this Bond's sheer directness and brute force and bloody mindedness. There's one part where the free runner, or the criminal guy, or whatever he is, he sort of kind of skips nicely over this wall, and Bond just comes crashing through the plasterboard. Again, it's got that real sort of heart-pumping, edge of your seat sort of kind of feel to it, which just hooks you in, and it is one of the most memorable action sequences of any Bond film in history, I think. He chases him into the Madagascar embassy, and gets this backpack off the guy, and then promptly kills him and blows the place up. He basically retrieves a mobile phone from the backpack and looks at the last text message, and it's got the word ellipsis, which at this stage we've got no idea what the hell's going on. Then it cuts to Le Chiffre, and he's playing a poker game on a yacht. something happens, and he tells his people to kill the people that he's playing with. And then we cut to a very pissed off M. Bond traces the source of the ellipsis text to the Bahamas, and he does it from her flat. He's basically, kind of for all intents and purposes, broken into her flat somehow and is waiting for her when she gets home, and has used her laptop. So basically we learn that Le Chiffre is basically financing all this organisation that he works for is financing an entire network of terrorist groups. And, it's at this point that I sort of noticed that Bond's tailoring in this movie is not very fitted. I think it's reminiscent maybe of the time, because in the 2000s, everything tended to be cut a little bit looser. It was only when we got into sort of the mid-2010s that things got a lot tighter, and you can certainly see that with the progression of Daniel Craig's movies. If you go to Skyfall, which was 2015, 2016, and you can see his suits are a lot more tightly fitted in there. Prior to that, in Casino Royale and, God, we only saw it the other night, Quantum of Solace, the tailoring isn't quite as tight. And I don't know if that was functional, or I think it was actually a bit more a sort of reminiscent of the actual time itself. So then we go to the Bahamas, and this is one of the little sort of jarring things for me with the product placement in the film, because a car bursts onto the scene and we're all waiting for an Aston Martin or something, and it's not. It's a bloody Ford Focus, or something that looks like a Ford Focus, but the camera really focuses on it, sorry for the pun, and it's really, really jarring for me, because it's like, what, I'm in a bloody Ford advert now? And I know for film financing and so on, they have all these product placements sort of pre-agreed, and that's how you fund things. And to be fair, it was getting really over the top towards the end of the Brosnan era. But yeah, I just think, as minimal as the product placement was in this film, it was still sort of, when it was there, it kind of hit you in the face, and I don't like that. So he arrives at the Ocean Club, and, this is where we kind of get more of a sense again of his directness, and also his cunning, and also a little bit of his wit as well. He basically, someone mistakes him for a car valet, and so he takes their Range Rover, and in order to create a distraction so that he can go into the security office, he basically drives the Range Rover and then runs bumps it into a load of other cars and sets a load of alarms off. This is where we see a classy car, because then the guy he's after, Mr. Demetrius, pulls up on the security recording in a 1964 Aston Martin. Absolutely beautiful car. And then we quickly get to the next scene, which is where Daniel Craig emerges from the ocean in those little swimming trunks. And I remember in the cinema, I was sat next to my then girlfriend, fiance, and I think every woman in the audience was sort of eyes on stalks, leaning forward in their seats. But it was, again, another sort of iconic moment of the Daniel Craig era. And I think for all the flack that he was getting when he was awarded the role, I think there were journalists, paparazzi and so on, who on the day of shooting for that scene had literally buried themselves in the sand, hiding the night before. And that shot just went all over the place in the newspapers and so on. And I think that was the moment when people, when they saw that, they started to take him a bit more seriously as the new 007. So he basically ends up hacking into the MI6 system with M's password yet again, because we then see that she's then woken up and gotten out of bed by her staff to say, look, he's using your password and he's looking at stuff. And basically what he's searching for is known associates of Le Chiffre. Going back to the clothing, so in the next scene, he's in what we call resort casual. So he's wearing a black shirt, which is untucked, it's looser cut, and the collar it's not a cutaway collar, it's a collar that's never meant to be done up. It's called a camp collar. And it's very popular on shirts that you see people wearing in places where it is very hot and sunny. So Miami Beach shirts, for example, is where you see a lot of that sort of style of shirt. And then he's wearing light coloured trousers. He just looks really cool and relaxed and sort of smartly dressed for, a night at an ocean club. Then I think he gets involved in a poker game at this stage because he goes to play this Demetrius guy. And Demetrius's girlfriend or wife, a woman called Katerina. Oh no, hang on. I can't remember her name. The actress is Caterina Moreno, Argentinian actress. She walks in an absolutely stunning red dress that probably distracts just about everybody in the place. But anyway, the poker game progresses. Demetrius goes all in and puts his car keys for his 1964 Aston in as well, and basically Bond wins it on 3 aces, and then proceeds to take his car and pick his wife up and go back to her apartment or his apartment, order some Bollinger up to the room after, leading her on, and then he buggers off because he basically needs to follow this Demetrius guy to Miami because that's where he's off to. And this is kind of the first sign that this Bond is going to be a little bit different because he doesn't actually sleep with her, which is, in my book, pretty cool because you particularly think back to the Roger Moore era where he was just getting into bed with just everything that he came across, and that can get a bit tedious. So it was kind of nice to see that he doesn't do that with this. So then he gets to the airport and ends up killing this Demetrius guy in what's one of those sort of weird Body World type exhibitions. Well, not a Body World type exhibition. It actually is a Body World exhibition. And Demetrius basically had left a token for somebody and a bag. And by the time Bond kills him, the token and the bag are gone. This guy's taken them and 007 tracks him to an airport. There's a cameo by Richard Branson, who if you just have a look at the beginning of that airport scene, you'll see him with his arms up in the air going through an airport scanner. Not really that cool because, Richard Branson, whatever. Bond calls MI6 for some help, and then he realises that ellipsis is actually the key code for the airport kind of back rooms and stuff. And basically what the other guy has done is use the code to go in, kill a guard, take a uniform, or I think there was a uniform in the guy's bag actually, and then he goes to take a one of those luggage trucks or something, because the idea obviously is that this plane that Le Chiffre had put a big bet against is being launched, and they're going to go blow it up basically, and I guess that's how they're going to tank the stock. Another great action scene. 007 manages to stop it, and Le Chiffre basically loses all the warlord's money. So then now he's in like really, really big trouble. It's 101,206,000 that Le Chiffre has lost, just gone up in smoke. And obviously he's going to start having all these warlords coming after him. So that really then sets up the plot for the rest of the movie, because that's where we're going to have the big poker game that takes place in Montenegro. So we then go back to the Bahamas. The wife of Demetrius is found dead. M tells Bond off, which seems to be a theme in this film. She acts like his mum and keeps telling him off all the time. And she decides to put a tracker in him to keep an eye on him because he keeps going off and doing what he shouldn't be doing. They find out that Le Chiffre has set up a high-stakes poker game in Montenegro because obviously he wants to claw all that money back. But because of who he works for, M makes it explicit that she wants him alive. Bond is not to kill him because obviously Le Chiffre has got a ton of information that he can give to the intelligence services. So now we're kind of getting towards the main sort of thrust and plot of the film. We cut to a train. Vesper appears for the first time, played by Eva Green. She's the HM Treasury Liaison Officer. And this is the first time we see Daniel Craig in a proper suit. So he's wearing a striped suit it's got a sort of self-stripe to it. And then he's got a white shirt and burgundy tie. And then Eva Green is wearing a black trouser suit, kind of a little bit less effeminate, more masculine sort of way of dressing her. And I think, again, maybe that was obviously a deliberate choice, maybe to, try and get away from the sort of ooh la la, I'm so helpless, sort of Bond girl cliche that had gone before in, previous movies. They have a little bit of back and forth, and again, there's a bit of brand mentioning because she mistakes his Omega for a Rolex and he corrects her, which I would have thought Omega would have been a bit pissed off at, that their watch is seemingly mistaken for a Rolex. But anyway, they get to where they're going. They get to Montenegro and they check in. He gets the keys to an Aston Martin DBS, which is a beautiful car, really. I mean, they introduced that model in 2007. It was 2007, 2008. It was probably available for normal people to buy. But it's an absolutely stunning little two-seater. But then this is the disappointing thing. So we're used to, in James Bond films, like Bond getting the car from Q and, going through all the gadgets and so on. The one that sticks in my mind is the BMW 7 Series from Tomorrow Never Dies, where Bond has got an Ericsson phone with a remote control to control it. The reason that one sticks in my mind is because I love that sequence with the remote control car, but also part of that sequence was actually filmed in Brent Cross car park, which is my local shopping centre. But yeah, this car, he opens a door and opens a glove box, and there's a gun and a defibrillator, and that's it. And I don't know about you, but if I was a secret agent, a defibrillator would be the least sexy piece of gadgetry that anyone could flipping give me. It makes it kind of obvious that the defibrillator is going to need to be used at some point. We meet Mathis for the first time. And then for this scene, Eva Green is in a cream suit, looking absolutely stunning. 007 is in a midnight navy suit with a self-striped shirt, and it just has got so much gravitas, that outfit. I saw someone today for a wedding fitting, and it's a Christmas wedding, and he wanted something that had gravitas, and we ended up with a midnight blue suit, 3-piece, which is not going to be too dissimilar, actually, to the one in this scene. So we then get to the famous tux, because the next scene is back at the hotel in the evening, and Bond brings Vesper her dress, and then she basically tells him that she's got him a tux, which he's not happy about because it's not tailored. Oh no, it is tailored, but she then says, well, yeah, fine, but I sized you up when I met you, blah, blah, blah. So this is setting up the sort of love thing that's going on between them. And it is exactly as I described it at the top of the episode, my wedding suit. It's a single-breasted, one-button peak lapel Brioni. The shirt is a fly front shirt, so the front buttons are all covered. And then when he then goes into the casino to meet all the other players and take his place at the table, it's really interesting when you see all the other dinner suits. But highlights are Le Chiffre, who's wearing a velvet dinner jacket with a black shirt, which is a really interesting choice. It creates a bit of contrast between him and Bond. I think what it also does, by putting him all black, obviously he's the bad guy, so that kind of symbolises that meanness that he has. And then Felix Leiter, played by Jeffrey Wright, is wearing a shawl lapel black tux. And Felix Leiter, for those of you who don't know or for some reason haven't seen the film, is basically the CIA guy. So he's from Uncle Sam, and they're also tracking Le Chiffre as well. They want to get hold of him because obviously they want access to everything that he knows. In that same scene, because the camera sort of pans through and we sort of very briefly meet all of the other players that are going to be around the table, you see that the peak lapel, the double-breasted style lapel, is very, very popular. I love a peak lapel on a single-breasted jacket because what it does is it draws the eyeline out towards the shoulder points, so it makes you look broader, and in doing that, it makes your waist look narrower, so it makes you look like you've got a leaner, more muscular physique, and it gives you more presence. So anyone who's looking to get a dinner suit or even get a suit, it's worth having a look at a peak lapel jacket if you're wanting to look broader and look a bit leaner, especially if you're carrying a few extra COVID pounds. And the croupier is wearing a notch lapel, which is basically the sort of lapel that you'd find on most suits as standard. I kind of see that as putting him in his place because the notch lapel isn't that exciting. It's quite ordinary. And at the end of the day, who the hell is he? He's just the guy that's raking in the chips and stuff. No offense to any groupiers that are listening to this episode. Vesper makes her entrance in this amazing purple dress. I mean, the idea is that she distracts all the other players and they can't take their eyes off her and so on, and it certainly does that job. It does the job for the audience as well. And then this is where we see 007 ordering his now very famous vodka martini, shaken not stirred, but he never calls it by that name because we have to remember this is, baby Bond for all intents and purposes. And I need to look up all the ingredients, but I remember it being a dry martini with 3 measures of Gordon's, a number of measures of Casino Royale, I think, 1 vodka. I can't remember the rest of it. A thin slice of lemon peel, and served over ice, but shaken, not stirred. So yeah, anyway, he takes a sip of it and he actually really likes it, and he's like, I should think of a name for that. And then the funny thing here is that everybody else looks at what he does, and then they all basically are like, yeah, I'll have one of those, I'll have one of those, I'll have one of those. And Felix, stops the barman and goes, yeah, I'll have one, but keep the fruit. And Le Chiffre basically just gets really pissed off, and starts sucking on his asthma inhaler and giving away his tells and all that sort of thing. So they start playing poker. At this point, I knew nothing about the game of poker. I have played it a lot of times since. I am rubbish at it. I have cleared my friends out once, and that's because I basically have no idea what I'm doing. but I kind of enjoy it. It's kind of fun. But when I first saw this movie, I had no idea about poker. And this is what I think they do really, really well. For someone who's not into poker or who doesn't know about it, they've actually found a way to make it kind of interesting and exciting. To for all intents and purposes, make an action movie or a thriller where a third of the movie takes place around a poker table and actually make it engaging is some accomplishment. So take my hat off to the scriptwriters and the director for the way that they handled all of this. When a game break comes, Le Chiffre is basically attacked in his room by the Ugandan warlord who's million quid he basically lost. Bond tracks Le Chiffre, and basically the thug spots Bond's earpiece because Bond's sort of outside Le Chiffre's room and trying to work out what's going on, and then the thugs come out and they spot his earpiece, and then they basically go for him, and there's a massive fight on a staircase. Again, it carries on that theme of being really visceral and very visually violent, the Bond ends up killing the warlord by basically strangling him, possibly breaking his neck. But it's not quick. It's, they really linger on it. So you really, really feel the air being choked out of that guy. And then, Bond has to patch himself up because he's injured and he's bleeding and so on. And it's really interesting during that scene where he's patching himself up and he's, using brandy or whatever alcohol to try and stop the bleeding on his face and his knuckles and so on. There's absolutely no sound whatsoever. There's no soundtrack, there's no music, there's nothing. It's just him, a mirror, and blood, and it's quite powerful imagery, and that kind of sets you up emotionally for the next scene, which is where he goes to check on Vesper, and she's basically sat in the shower with her dress still on and the water running. And in this scene, basically, I think in the original script they were meant to take their clothes off or whatever, and I don't know, snog each other or something. But Daniel Craig had a word with the director and said, no, that's not how it would go. I think he would just go and put his arm around her and, comfort her and so on. And that's how that scene kind of ended up. It was a Daniel Craig suggestion to not take it to a risque place. So he basically, sits down in the shower with her, undoes his bow tie. She says she's cold, so he turns the water up and makes it a bit warmer, and then he puts his arm around her, and she starts crying into his shoulder and stuff, and it's just a really tender scene and a tender moment. What I don't understand is that it seems she only got him one tux, and he got that one tux soaking wet. And I know from experience, having done the ice bucket challenge a few years ago and getting a charcoal suit completely ruined once it was put under that much water, I'm wondering how he managed to dry that one tux out so quickly. So, bit of a costume continuation error issue there for me. Anyway, look, what does it matter in the grand scheme of things? So we go back to the poker game. There's a situation where Bond thinks that Le Chiffre is bluffing, so he goes all in. Vesper's now in a black dress because they managed to not do a continuation error there. She looks nice, but not as good as she did in the purple dress. I think the black dress actually makes Eva Green look older in that scene. Bond loses everything, and he gets really angry, goes to Vesper. She's meant to fund him an additional $5 million in the event that it's needed, but she refuses it because she says that he's reckless. And he then decides to grab a knife and go after Le Chiffre, presumably to, stop him using violence. But Felix stops him and basically says that he's bleeding chips, but Bond obviously has got a chance of beating him. And so he offers to fund Bond and get him back in the game in exchange for the CIA taking Le Chiffre, and Bond basically agrees to it. But in the meantime, Le Chiffre's girlfriend has gone and spiked Bond's drink and poisoned him. So they start the game again, and Bond starts to feel unwell, and he suddenly has to get up because he suddenly realises that he's been poisoned, and he grabs a salt jar from a table and goes to the toilet, tries to make himself vomit. It's not working. Now, I've actually done this before. Let me explain. So, when I was younger and I was first working as a tailor in the city, we used to go out almost every night. Because for me, it was a novelty, being from Croydon and suddenly working in central London and being around all these trendy bars and clubs and stuff. For me, it was just like a dream come true, and I was going to make the most of it. But the problem is I couldn't, and probably still can't, hold my drink. So I remember we went to this club called Ruby Lowe's, which was in Portman Square. And one of my friends bought me a Mai Tai, and I have got a sweet tooth. So if you give me a drink that's got alcohol in it and it's sweet, I will just drink it like it's Ribena. Like, I will neck that down like there's no tomorrow. So I think I tore through 2 or 3 of these in very quick succession, and I was absolutely out of my mind. And I knew I was going to pass out, and so I did exactly what Bond does in that scene. I grabbed a salt jar and went to the toilets and basically proceeded to make myself throw up. It didn't work. I passed out, and my friends basically had to break into the cubicle to get me out of there. Luckily for Bondo, he was poisoned. I was just completely drunk. So, there's a difference. He gets out, he gets to his car, and this is where we see the use of that amazing defibrillator. So he attaches it to himself. He's on the phone to MI6. They're guiding him through. He passes out just before the critical point where he has to hit the button to, charge his chest or whatever. Because I think there was a cable's undone. Vesper manages to turn up, plug it in, and save him. And then he basically goes straight back to the table, having died like 5 minutes before. He wins with a straight flush and takes Le Chiffre for everything. And then we cut to a sort of scene where he basically has taken Vesper, and they are eating in an empty room of the hotel. I think maybe it's a restaurant that's not being used or something. And he's eating probably beluga caviar on toast and all that sort of stuff. I've got no idea. I've never eaten caviar in my life. But it looks like he's enjoying himself. But there's a few little key details here about where the story's going to go, because you kind of think to yourself, well, that's it, the film's over, right? He's done what he needed to do. Le Chiffre has been taken by the CIA. He's, cleaned him out of all his money. What's left? Mission accomplished. But there's more coming. So he sees Vesper's necklace and mentions that it's an Algerian love knot and that someone must have given it to her. And she kind of looks a bit cagey and upset, and, there's obviously something going on that she's not telling him. She very quickly gets taken, and then Bond has to go after them in the DBS. And again, kind of slightly disappointing, because you kind of think the first time you see that car in action, you want to see it, kind of properly in action. But they've basically tied her up in the middle of the road, not far from the club. He's going at top speed, and then he has to swerve to avoid killing her. And then the car ends up rolling over and over again. And I remember at the time that scene where the car rolls over and over, it made the Guinness Book of Records for the most number of car rolls in an action stunt scene ever. So anyway, there we go. Le Chiffre basically takes Bond, because obviously Bond's like injured from the wreckage and, sort of half passed out. And we find out that Mathis was basically playing both sides. So he's kind of like a double agent. He works for whoever's paying him the money. And Mathis had basically betrayed Bond. There's then this torture scene, which is absolutely excruciating. So they're on some sort of boat, and Le Chiffre's got Bond stripped down naked in a chair that he's cut the seat out of. So, Bond's bollocks, testicles are obviously hanging underneath. And Le Chiffre's got this rope that he's tied a knot into at the bottom. And he's basically swinging it underneath the chair and then knocking his balls up. And I swear to God, any guy who has not crossed their legs and clenched their balls and felt that pain in your stomach that you get when you get kicked in the nuts, you're not human, seriously, because the way they filmed this and the way it was done, and if you're imagining that happening to you, it's got to be the most painful thing ever. But I love the humour that comes across from Bond. Where he tells Le Chiffre, "I've got a little itch down there. Would you mind?" So Le Chiffre basically says, "I like you. You've got, you're very funny." Whacks him in the bollocks, and then Daniel Craig just crying his eyes out is basically, to the left, you missed. Suddenly, Mr. White, the mysterious Mr. White, comes in and kills Le Chiffre. And he mentions our organisation. So this is kind of setting up that there's some organisation that is sitting over and above everything, that's pulling all the strings. And I don't know if that was, if Spectre, because obviously the fourth film is Spectre, and that's where we see the return of Blofeld. I don't know if they were setting Spectre up, or if they were maybe having that idea and they thought if they just kind of dropped it in there and left it open, it would then give them license to go kind of wherever they wanted with the story in future films. But anyway, it's apparent that, Le Chiffre and Mr. White are not the big evils. There is something sinister going on in the background. So then we sort of cut to Bond recovering, and Mathis is trying to find out why, this organisation that Mr. White works for had left Bond and Vesper alive. But Bond then has got a couple of MI6 agents there to take Mathis basically and arrest him. Then the Swiss banker comes to transfer all of the winnings from the poker game over to Bond, and he lets Vesper put the password into the thing for the account transfer, and it turns out that the password that Bond uses is Vesper. It's her name, and this is the point where we find out that he loves her, because he basically tells her that he loves her in a really long-winded way that I'm not going to repeat now. But, when you watch the film, it's kind of sweet, but it kind of makes you sick at the same time. She's obviously upset because there's something that she's hiding. And he basically explains that he does love her and he wants to quit everything for her. So there's this whole montage of them sort of, being together and doing things together, and him on his Sony Vaio, another blatant product placement laptop, because obviously it's a Sony Columbia Pictures film, because by this time Sony had acquired Columbia Pictures. So yeah, he resigns MI6, they sail to Venice, and as they get into Venice Harbour, there's this guy who's walking along in a hat. He's really thin. He looks like, one of those atypical sort of Nazi types that you might have seen in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he's wearing glasses, but one lens is clear and the other one's black. I mean, he looks like a villain. And you literally see him on the pier and you're thinking, suspicious guy alert, why has no one spotted him? So anyway, they go to a hotel room. She says she wants to, pay her half towards the lifestyle that they're, sort of living, and that she needs to go to the bank. So he goes, but And then when she leaves, M calls Bond up to ask about the winnings, and he thought that the winnings had been transferred back to the government, but where they were supposed to go, but they haven't. And then he realises that Vesper's up to something. So he calls the Swiss banker, and he looks up what's going on with the funds and tells Bond that all the funds are being drawn and taken. And so Bond realises that Vesper's obviously taken all the money, basically. So he races to the bank, and then he ends up following her and through all these sort of little passageways and so on. And I think he's going to kill her, basically, because that's what this Bond does. He's like a flipping Terminator. He sees her passing the suitcase with the money in it to the guy with the glasses, and then he chases after them, and they escape into this house that's sort of being under construction or under some sort of rectification order, because there are big floats that are keeping the house up, because this house is on the bank of the Venice Canal. Sorry, my dog Bailey is now wanting his dinner. I need to finish recording this and get it out there for the people. So could you please let me carry on? Thank you. So yeah, there are these floats that are keeping the house up, and basically 007 shoots them and causes the place to start flooding and collapsing. Vesper gets stuck in a lift. After he kills everybody, he goes to try and get her out. She says she's sorry. She takes the key out of the lift cage and basically drowns. And again, that is really quite awful to watch, because, you know, you actually see her inhaling water into her lungs and dying. He eventually manages to get her out and get her to the surface, gives her CPR, but she's gone. Mr. White is watching all of this, and the case obviously bobs to the surface, and he's taken it. It turns out that basically she was being blackmailed by the organisation behind Le Chiffre and Mr. White. And Bond finds this out when M basically sort of calls him to debrief him. And, you know, he's obviously feeling quite hard up about it because he was in love with her and he feels betrayed. And, you know, he utters the, you know, now famous line, "The bitch is dead." And M tries to calm him down and explain that Vesper actually made a deal to save his life, and that's the only reason why he's still there. So it seems that his resignation was never accepted by M, and you know, she needs him back in the game. And then we cut to the sort of epilogue scene, which is where we see Mr. White outside some sort of fancy house on the coast, sort of looking out, presumably sort of satisfied with his day's work. His phone rings and he answers it, but then he gets shot in the leg, and then 007 appears looking like the boss. I mean, the guy is wearing a 3-piece navy striped suit, a blue shirt and tie, which was a perfect choice because Daniel Craig has got these piercing blue eyes, and that colour combination just really, it gives him stature, it gives him height, it accentuates his build. You know, he's carrying this massive sniper type flipping rifle that he's got hoisted over his shoulder. He just looks the business. And then, you know, he utters the famous James Bond, to tell Mr. White exactly who he is. And then we cut to the credits and the famous Bond music, and that's it. That's Casino Royale. That's Daniel Craig's first go at James Bond. I think it was really super successful. It turned out to be an amazing bit of casting. I really, really wanted to do a rewatch of Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, and Spectre ahead of No Time to Die coming out, but unfortunately, I'm recording this on Thursday, the 30th of September. No Time to Die came out today. It had its premiere about 2 days ago. I've just been so busy. We obviously had our difficulties through the pandemic, which regular listeners will have heard me banging on about before. We've had a moderately good time since May of this year, but this month we did 2 months worth of business in the first 3 weeks, and it's just been crazy. So I've just had my hands full, and that's the other reason why Tailoring Talk for the moment has gone to bi-weekly rather than weekly episodes. So I apologise for that, but I thank you so much for your support, and thank you for sort of bearing with me as well. But that's my little Casino Royale rewatch, and sort of my little kind of highlights of the outfits in the movie. If there's any questions that you've got, anything that you want to know, I've over the years, as Daniel Craig has been Bond, I've recreated outfits for clients from every single film, and I'm really excited to see No Time to Die this weekend. I'll hopefully be doing a little review. I'll definitely be doing a review on my other podcast that I do with John Evans, Mark Holmes, Amy and Alex Hansford, called Play, Pause, Turn, where we review what we're watching, what we're reading, and what we're playing. Games, books, music, films, not music, films, and TV. But I might actually try and get the team on to my podcast. Actually, yeah, I'm going to try and make that happen. I'm going to try and get John, Amy, Alex, and Mark over onto Tailoring Talk so that we can maybe review No Time to Die. That would be quite a fun episode, actually. And then I can talk through all of the outfits in that. We did see Quantum of Solace the other night. I think we're going to try and cram in Skyfall and Spectre tonight and tomorrow. Quantum of Solace, there's not really much to talk about in terms of outfits. He's only got about 3. That film had a lot of problems. It's the worst one out of the 5, for sure. It's not a terrible film, but it was made, they started filming, they didn't have a complete script because of the writer's strike that was going on at the time. So they started filming without really not knowing where the story was going, and I think that does come across in that film as well. It's a little bit disjointed and a bit jarring, where Casino Royale just flowed so well. Quantum of Solace is like a smack in the face, and it's not helped by that Jack White and Alicia Keys song as well, Another Way to Die. It's I love both of those artists, but together, for me, that song just did not work as well. Hopefully we'll be able to cram the other 2 films in tonight and tomorrow, and then Saturday, then we'll go and see the new one. But yeah, I can't wait to talk about it. I can't wait to see what the outfits are in the film, and also start sort of thinking about that from a client point of view, what I'm going to be dressing people in, because every single time a new Bond film comes out, you can bet for the next year or 2 we're going to be showcasing the outfits to clients, and particularly the dinner suits and things are always what's in fashion based on what was in the Bond movie that most recently came out. So in 2016, the most popular dinner suit style for me was a navy or blue tux with a shawl lapel. For 2 or 3 years until Spectre arrived, every wedding I did that was black tie was basically a copy of that Skyfall tux. So yeah, Bond has such a huge influence on men's fashion and so on, and wearing something that is evocative of something that Bond has worn in a 007 movie can really change how someone feels about themselves. The look doesn't matter, it's how you feel. And you can suddenly put on a tux that is a copy of something from Skyfall or Casino Royale, and suddenly you feel like a superhero. And you've got that famous James Bond theme playing in your head as you're doing your cufflinks and so on. So, for me, James Bond is something that I've obviously, like many of us, has been a constant throughout my entire life. I've loved the series. Again, Daniel Craig for me is my favourite Bond. I love what they've done with these movies mostly. I love the fact that it's a story arc carried over 5 films, because that's never really happened in the series history before. But as a tailor, as someone who dresses people, someone who tries to put people in their best light and give them as much confidence as possible, it's the costuming that always makes me excited for a new Bond film. So yeah, I'll be back to I'll be back to talk through Daniel Craig's outfits in this latest movie. So thank you so much for joining me for the past hour. It's been a privilege, as always, to have you give up some of your time to spend it with me. Do send me your feedback. Drop me a message on social media. You can find me on Twitter at It's Bobby Revilla. You can find me on Instagram at The Roberto Revilla, and on our company Instagram at Roberto Revilla London, also on Insta. Those of you that are customers will have my number. You can also email me at contact@robertorevillalondon.com. If you're liking the show, as ever, my plea to you is, please, if your podcast platform allows, please give us a rating and a review. It really helps other people to find the show, and it helps with those pesky Google algorithms as well. This has been episode 21 of Tailoring Talk. If you are going to be seeing the new Bond movie over the next week, I would love to hear your opinion on it. If you would like to join me to review the film and have a chat about it, then I'd love to have you. So let me know. Whatever you do over the coming days until the next time we meet, stay safe, stay well, and Tailoring Talk will be back.